I think it's time for some questionable news. Darn, darn, darn. This is a little game that we like to play to see if you can find the real headlines and determine which ones are real and which ones are fake. So it's now up to you. Now, of course, you can also, in the audience, you can also vote if you like. So we're going to show you something, and then you have to say whether it was true or whether it was an actual headline or whether it was fake. And the first one is scientists successfully reverse human aging process in breakthrough study. Here's Dale. What do you think?
Do we vote?
Yeah, what do you think? You have to vote out loud, though.
I'm going to say fake.
What do you think, Fran?
Ooh, that's tough. You see that headline all the time, but I'm going to say fake as well.
What do you think, Dale? Can you hear us?
I'm sorry. I got kicked off. Technology problems. I'm back, but I missed the question.
Okay. Do you think this is fake or real headline?
Okay. Scientists successfully reverse human aging process in breakthrough study. I think I'm going to say false.
Oh, see, it's really a true headline.
We're all such cynics.
Yeah, you know what? I found it this week, actually. It was awesome. So it's this Israeli study where they put people in a hyperbaric chamber and gave them pure oxygen. And it was 90 minutes a day for 3 months. And they found, it sounds crazy, but they found that their senescent cells decreased by up to 37% by the end of the trial. And their telomeres, which, as you know, their telomere length is correlated with aging, actually increased. So they looked the equivalent of 20. They didn't look, but their cells looked the equivalent of 25 years younger after 3 months. This is a study that just came out this week. So yeah, I know, Fran, you're right. We see this all the time. It's like, oh, we're reversing aging.
They can make me look 25 years younger.
So, but it is kind of questionable because we don't know what the long-term effects are, and it was a pretty small sample size. There are only 35 people.
Right.
They're all over 64. And you just know.
Yeah.
And you just know, Gary, that someone's out there who's going to be phoning in, offering you a hyperbaric chamber now. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
But still, it's a real headline. Okay, next one, Carrie. Okay, do these 3 things every day to avoid Alzheimer's. Fake or real?
Oh, I think that's real. Yeah, I think you see that a lot too, I think, right?
What do you think?
Certainly see it a lot. Whether it's actually true is another question. I don't know.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree with Fran. And it depends on what they are.
I'm
going to third that and go with it's probably a real headline, but who knows?
It isn't. We made it up. Ha ha.
I'm sure we can find it somewhere.
Yes, I'm sure. Now someone is writing that article as we speak. Absolutely. Okay, next one. Too much exposure to blue light may fast track aging. Even without eye contact. Fran, this should be one right up your alley.
I'm just going with what Fran says.
You will see that. It's a topic of great debate in the field. So I will say true. True that's a headline. Complicated story as to whether you should believe it.
What do you think, Dale?
I'm going to agree with Fran. And I think it's a real headline.
It is a real headline, but it was done on fruit flies, and they got 12 hours of blue light. So, not quite sure that is a headline.
You don't want 12 hours; you just want it in the morning.
Much better. See, you should be writing the headlines, Fran. Thank you. But it is a real headline. Okay, no to dementia. Drink red wine, eat dark chocolates, and other flavonoid-rich foods.
Oh well, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I'll buy that. I think it's real.
Yeah, I
agree.
Real too.
Yeah, I'm just hoping it's real.
I'm going to believe it whether or not. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think we're all voting on. We're upvoting on that, and it in fact was a headline. So, red wine, dark chocolate. I don't even like dark chocolate. It's a shame. I'm hoping that milk chocolate has.
We'll just send it my way.
Okay. But again, it's kind of questionable. They studied a bunch of adults who were over 50 for 20 years, but it's all self-report, right? So
yeah,
no, but it is absolutely a real headline. So, good job. So we have so many questions coming in. Oh dear. So I'm just going to pick one. Okay. I'm going to pick one for Dale because you were kicked off. What's the current evidence on using computer brain training platforms like Lumosity, which I see ads for all the time, Happy Neuron, to improve cognitive functioning and to generalize benefits to daily function? What do you think? Are they real things? What do they do? I've never been opened up at Lumosity.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's very specific. And in a longer talk where I'm going to be presenting sort of the stuff, the work that I did with neurofeedback training, I would absolutely delve into that. There's been an incredible amount of controversy around brain training games. And I'll just name one by name because it was already put in this question, like Lumosity, for example. And so the idea was that they had, these are things you can download or, pay per use service. And they claim to help you sharpen different aspects of cognition. And so you're engaged in some sort of a game that, that it changes based on your performance. And the thing was that they were making claims that, obviously, it's, like I said before, when you go to the gym, it's not just to get better at lifting weights. Usually you want to, getting better at lifting weights makes you healthier and stronger in your life. So the thing was that there was a huge controversy and a big legal battle, actually, where some of the brain training companies were making claims of generalizability of their findings. So sure enough, people get better at the game and better, and that is rewarding, and it feels like you're gaining expertise, and you are. But the fundamental question is, does that actually translate or generalize into any other aspects of life? And there's very little evidence on it. At the time, there were some studies pointed to by the companies. In the end, there was actually a huge fine leveled towards one of the companies, probably the major one, for false claims, that they did not have any actual evidence of generalizability. There was actually a very big consensus statement from a lot of the big sort of scientists, well-known academics and scientists in the field of cognition and memory and aging, who came out and made a claim that these things were not well validated. And so that is precisely what I'm not trying to do with the neurofeedback training. The idea with the neurofeedback training is indeed you get better at this little interface. You get faster and faster at riding your bike through the mountains with your mind, right, your brain. However, what we're showing are changes on unrelated or related, but different sets of kinds of tests. So we're doing standardized neuropsychological memory tests and tests of attention and tests of mood and things, and looking pre and post training. And that's where we're seeing differences. So the evidence that we have so far relates to generalizable effects. More work is being done with the brain training games, but I think that the weight of evidence is still very paltry for those.
Did they ever contact you about these brain training places? Did they ever contact you to say, hey, help us make our game better?
No, but the company that's developing the neurofeedback training came to me, and that's why I'm involved in this project. Yeah. This is a company that said, we've got something we think works, but we want a scientist to take it, do an independent double-blind validation experiment, and to let us know if it works, which is probably the right way to do it.
Well, that's what you want to hear, is that somebody who wants you to do that, doesn't just want to make money. That's fantastic. Right.
And I don't think there's much out there. There's any sort of apps like that really have a solid, demonstration of generalizability. So,
yeah, I think that's the issue.
Yeah.
Fran,
yes.
Vision is important to everybody. Obviously, lots of questions about this. You did mention cataracts a little bit. Mm-hmm. If somebody can't get cataract surgery now because of the pandemic or because of whatever, does this cause permanent problems, or do those problems go away once the cataract surgery's happened?
No, if you're an older person, the good news is, well, your vision may get worse while you're waiting for the surgery, and so you have to be pretty careful during that time. This is when you're susceptible to, falls and things like that. But no, your underlying retina will not be affected by that, unlike a baby where it would be. So the good news is that once you get that surgery, you're going to be able to see again and see quite well. So that's not something to worry about. Just be careful until you can get it.
Yeah, I thought the idea of having lights on inside the house, that was a brilliant idea so that you can actually get more contrast. That was great.
Yeah, well, falls are the thing we want to worry about, not what's happening to our retina in the case of cataracts.
Cool. This one, I think this is probably for you as well, Dale. And then I'm going to ask Gary one. Here's your question, Gary. What do you think is the best way to avoid fraud or scams?
So I would say right now, the best evidence, I've kind of been working with people, actually surprisingly in the legal community, who deal with a lot of the repercussions of financial fraud and scams and whatnot. And one of the best pieces of advice, so we're coming at this from a cognitive and a social perspective, as I said, and a brain perspective, but I think there's two pieces of advice I would give. One is, I mentioned it during my talk, is to always have someone who you trust around you help you make that decision if it's a big financial decision. So I think that's really critical. But even more than that, there's like, it's kind of like part 1A and part 1B. The B part of this is you actually should always have two people. And this is really important. And those two people should be from different parts of your life. A family member and a friend, a trusted coworker, a trusted, someone, so that you can always run these decisions by two separate people. Because remember what I mentioned, a lot of the vast majority of financial exploitation happens from people you know, and within family quite often. So the idea of having like the buffer of having two trusted advisors, so to speak, is really important. And I'll just say the other aspect is take your time. So in my work, I teach a strategy called stop, relax, refocus. And the stopping idea, to pause, is so fundamental to any decision making. But one of the things that scammers use, I'll just use the term scammers, people who are kind of going for fraud, is they use high pressure. They want rapid response under high pressure conditions. And no one makes a good decision, obviously, under high pressure. And I think the ability to make the best decision is not going to happen when you do it fast without pausing. And so I would say those are the two things. Have a trusted cohort of advisors, so to speak, and then also stop, relax, refocus. Don't let someone pressure you.
Yeah, I think that salespeople have been doing that since the dawn of time, right? Just got to make the decision today or you lose the deal. So
tomorrow.
Yeah, anytime you do that, there's a red flag.
Yeah,
I think, Gary, this is related to what you just said, so I'm going to ask this question. So, as you noted, the impact of social isolation and loneliness impacts all of the research. So, as the so-called benefits of aging independently or aging in place might not be necessarily the goal, right? So, is research or work beginning to grow regarding how to develop and maintain interdependence and intergenerational communities and connections, which you need if you're going to have trusted advisors to help you out?
It's absolutely, and that's kind of one of the biggest in the field of exploitation, one of the biggest risks of social isolation, right? Like you're not being able to access your trusted advisors and whatnot. So whether we're moving in this direction, what I can say is that there is a movement afoot to actually have people age in place together. And so the idea of setting up homes homes and living communities and where older adults are able to come together and live together, right? And it sounds kind of maybe, I was going to say communally, but it's the idea is that you still retain your independence, but you set up a culture of looking out for each other. And there's actually been kind of I think a fairly strong move afoot to move in that direction. And so in that regard, you actually get the best of both worlds. You get the age in place, of course, and maintain your independence, but you also set up a community around you. So I think that's the general direction I get from the literature.
So it's Golden Girls then?
It's more or less the Golden Girls.
Well, who doesn't want that as a role model? That's fantastic.
The Golden Girls with snow in Canada.
Sometimes that can be a virtual community too. I mean, there is interest in doing that because the downside of the living community we're seeing right now with retirement residences and places where people are locked down more than the rest of us so in times like now, that can be a difficult problem. So
Right.
I think a lot of people are
agree.
weighing these things right now in terms of how would I want to live.
I agree with that, Fran, actually. And it's kind of a nice way of turning our fatigue with Zoom and online things a little bit toward the positive, right? That ability to build a community online is as important. Yeah.
And it's pretty incredible if you think what you can do. I mean, you can take dance lessons and, learn how to cook, do everything that way. So yeah, without any danger
And
at
a
all.
Zumba class.
Yeah, Zumba. Fantastic. Okay, Dale, here's a question. You ready? Are you ready?
I think I'm ready.
Why does the default part remain so active in seniors when the attention part is activated? How could a person reduce that so as to more effectively deal with the attention challenge?
Yeah, see, that's a right on point question. So this is what we're trying to figure out. If we've got a bit of a chicken or an egg situation in our hands. There's an idea, and some of this is seminal work that Gary Turner and colleagues have done, showing that it's not just about our failure to sort of suppress this network, but that we're actually engaging with our control network. It seems that older adults are either stuck focusing or intentionally focusing more on their semantic knowledge and their maybe this is that fluid cognition declines with age, and so we rely more on our stored knowledge and our wisdom, accumulated wisdom. But I think the point is that there are situations where doesn't serve you well, right? Paying attention, remembering where you put things, the fluid kinds of cognition things, altering your path when you're driving somewhere, when there's a detour and you've got to get there. Anything that's flexible is important, and particularly out there in the real world. And so, why does it stay on? I think we don't know that. And so, one of the ways we're using non-invasive brain stimulation now is to say, it's one thing to scan the brain and say, wow, the more that people sort of rely on their semantic cognition or their crystallized cognition and show declines in their fluid cognitive abilities, the more we see this brain pattern. But that's a correlation. We don't know one's causing the other, right? But now we're getting in there with non-invasive brain stimulation, saying, okay, well, let's tamp the default network down. What happens? Do they just sort of lose access to all this wisdom they've developed and all the semantic knowledge, or now they're able to focus and do tasks at the ready and focus on the external world more? We're doing that right now. In fact, we're not right now because of the pandemic. All our labs are closed. But we're in the middle of doing that up until May. But I guess how can you do that? Well, I think that, my guess would be, and Dr. Turner might be more the person to ask about this, but different kind of cognitive interventions where you're practicing being more engaged and relying on your control systems, doing things that are new, require new associations, new experiences, flexible thinking. And that's quite a bit different than saying, well, let's try and do it top down. Let's try and go in and modulate the brain activity and see if that improves. If that's something we're working on as well. So hopefully I'd be able to answer that question with soon. Just order a headset in our software, and you can.
It's pretty cool. Have you had TMS? Have you experienced it?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
What does it feel like? Does it feel like anything?
No, it doesn't. It depends on the sort of strength using. It might feel a little bit like just little taps on the head. What's interesting is as we know, there's a piece of the cortex, a strip here that has a homunculus, right? A representation of all the body parts. Or if we used to see these in the Canadian Heritage commercials, where if you poke a part of the brain here, it can cause a movement in the hand. If you poke another spot, it can cause a movement somewhere else or a sensation. So if you do TMS over what we think of as the hand area in this part of the brain, it'll make. So if I'm to zap, unofficial term, use TMS in this part of my brain, it makes my hand move. And if you move it enough, it can make your arm move. If you move to another spot, it can make it hard to speak. So it does activate the neurons underneath, and you can feel that. But when you're doing other regions that don't have a direct sort of one-to-one correlation with movement or sensation, you don't feel anything in your body. You might just feel a little bit on your head just from the the coil. It's not aversive.
It's kind of creepy.
Cool. Yeah.
I don't know.
Possibly creepy, but yeah, it's fun.
It's great and good. I'm glad you're doing it, but still. Okay, so this is one for you, for Dale and Gary, because it's really about fluid cognition and crystallized knowledge. So, does decrease in fluid cognition affect the development or formation, which you just mentioned, of crystallized knowledge? What are some ways to maintain the ability to draw from crystallized knowledge?
That's a good question, a tough one, and I'm going to punt to Gary on that.
So I think that's such a great question, and that is getting to the heart of where I'm going kind of with my research program. So it's the idea, and not many people bring this up. So it's such a great question because I'm interested in the intersection between these and how they interact. So Dale put up a really great slide that showed some things go up and some things go down, and that's fluid and crystallized. But we call it the shifting architecture of cognition. And so as you move into later life, you do have a preserved crystallized and decreased fluid. So the ability to leverage your crystallized knowledge in a fast, flexible way declines, to use Dale's term, right? So the idea here, my thinking, and this is a little bit opposite of the question, but my thinking is that the relative gain in crystallized knowledge as processing declines, like fluid processing declines, is actually further driving that decline. So I actually think there's almost a negative loop. So because you have the answer, so to speak, the wise answer, right? Like based on your crystallized knowledge, you may not go forward to find a more adaptive response, a more adaptive answer, and challenge your fluid abilities because your crystallized knowledge is sitting at the ready. And so I think the intersection fits in that way. So it's a little bit opposite. So the question was, how can you use your fluid to access your crystallized, I believe. And
Yes.
so I would say it's actually your crystallized knowledge is almost always at the ready. One of the big challenges, I think, with cognitive aging, at least as I'm starting to think it through, is somehow suppressing your access to all that crystallized knowledge that rushes forward and then does not allow you to be fast and flexible when you may need to be, right? So of course that's fantastic. All this knowledge is sitting there. And for the most part, that's amazing. Like that's great. That's what wisdom is, right? But sometimes it's not amazing when the context changes or when something happens, right? So the ability, and this comes back to Dale's work on the network idea and the earlier question, I think, that idea of kind of suppressing that default network, which actually brings, I would argue, brings forward a lot of this stored knowledge representation. And so dampening that down with age is probably a good thing in the context where you need it. And remember, more knowledge and lived experience is a very good thing. So that's really not a bad thing. It's not always good. So I think that's kind of the interesting part about this. So yeah, it's a great question.
Actually, it leads to, oh, sorry, Dale, did you want to say something?
I would do a very quick follow-up and just say I absolutely agree. I think that was really well put, Gary. And to summarize, I think what the way I would interpret is sort of you have to be careful not to get too stuck in your ways, right? As you get older, ingrained in your habits and what you know, and forget that there's, or lose your ability to consider the alternative and be flexible. And I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, it's an idea of stickiness, we call it, another good scientific term, like this idea of kind of being, but to that point, just a last quick point, is that this stored prior knowledge does have a certain gravitational pull. It's readily accessible and always at the ready, right? So it's important to think about that, and what that means for your ability to bring on your fluid cognition.
Cool. It kind of relates. So we had a viewer named Mary who sent email a lot of awesome questions, and we just don't have time. So I just want to wrap it up with one last thing. And Mary very rightly said, a lot of the things we talked about today are kind of ageist. So we kind of use negative language when we talk about aging without thinking about it, right? We say we're suffering from aging and, oh no, we're getting old, all these negative things. And that's actually kind of true. We're not suffering from aging. We're actually lucky to age. And if we think about who's coming in as the president of the United States. He's 78 years old. So let's hope that there are some good things with aging too. So maybe each of you could tell us some good things that are happening as you get older. And also, do you think that we are ageist? I kind of think we are an ageist society. Everything is about looking younger, being younger, staying younger. Your ultimate compliment is when someone says, oh, you don't look your age. So, it's kind of weird. What do you think, Fran?
Well, I definitely think we're an ageist society. I teach courses to older people, and one of the things we always do is try to figure out what terminology we want to use for ourselves. It's very hard to get people to agree on that because most of us don't like seniors, elderly, or any of those other words. Older is generally okay, although people can come up with lots of other choices. I think we have to be aware of that. We certainly live in an ageist society. We don't want us older people to be ageists ourselves. And I think we're all aware of changes that are happening, but they're not all bad changes. And I think the things that we seem to lose, like it's always harder to find names now, but we gain a lot of other things. As Gary said, positivity is one of them. Things don't bother us nearly as much. So I think there's a lot of positive things we can see in aging as well.
Agreed. What do you think, Gary? I know that is part of what you're looking at.
So I would say that I love being called out on this because it's so endemic. So I think we are a completely ageist society, fully, no, I have no dispute with that at all. What I really try and do, hopefully I was doing it through this talk and through this session, is there is so much great in aging. There's really, you are gaining all the knowledge, you still retain your ability to use that knowledge. It's amazing in terms of the wise aging. And so a lot of my work, so I always put up a slide in a moment when I go and teach my courses, and it says the idea of aging is like a straight line down. Right. And so then you kind of bring in the graph that Dale showed and whatnot, and you say, no, that's not true. Sure, some things decline, obviously, but there is a lot of gain that occurs with aging. And it's both cognitive gain that I talk about, Dale talked about, and what Fran just brought up, social gain, right? That ability of social, emotional functioning, being more positive about the future, kind of taking in something that's more positively valenced or what have you. There's really a lot of what gets me excited about doing this work is the positive and trying to push back as much as I possibly can against this ageist approach to almost everything. It's endemic. It's hard to fight back.
It is. And, you mentioned empathy too, and that people would try to take advantage of the fact that you get more empathic as you get older, when in fact that's a lovely thing to be more empathic. And
it's
yay.
Wonderful. Yeah, exactly. And more trusting. Who doesn't want that? It's wonderful, right? So this is a great question, really great question.
What do you think, Dale?
Well, I would agree. Great question. Really good point well taken. And I think excellent responses from Gary and Fran. And I would just concur with everything they said, that it isn't, it's a real issue. There's particularly, at least in our culture and our current civilization, our culture, it seems to be too much weighted towards a negative idea of aging, that it's just a negative thing in life, and it just doesn't make sense. I think about different cultures who would rely much more on elders and the wisdom of elders, and the idea that our aging across our lifespan is uniquely set up to do that kind of thing, to retain a lot of knowledge, to be able to integrate a lot of knowledge over a long span of time. That's not something that declines, and so there are good aspects. There are also really interesting cognitive neuroscience experiments demonstrating that some of these changes where older adults perform differently than younger adults actually have side benefits. The idea that younger adults are better at sort of focusing very clearly on something in a task and retaining that information, whereas older adults may not remember as much information in general, but actually take in more peripheral or contextual information. And a bias towards more positive emotions and remembering positive things. Really reiterating what Gary and Fran said. So I agree.
And can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
In these pandemic times, I actually worry much more about younger people who I think are having a much harder time right now. It's a very uncertain time for their lives, and there seems to be a lot of mental health issues in that group. And for the most part, apart from isolation, in some cases, I think older people are coping fairly well at the moment because we don't have all of those stressors that younger people have. So it's not all bad.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Thank you all. Thanks so much, Gary, Dale, and Fran, for telling us all these fabulous things and helping us all embrace getting older. It's inevitable, so let's embrace it. Thank you.